welcome our first guest, Jane Hodson-Hamilton, Senior Lecturer for the Law Department of Northumbria University. And Jane's going to tell us about some of the ways in which end of life comes into contact with the law. We're going to be talking about wills, we'll talk about powers of attorney, we'll have a talk about living wills, do not resuscitate, and we may even touch on probate. Very welcome, Jane.
Good afternoon.
Let's start with wills. Why do we make them? What happens if we don't make them? Things to watch out for.
Okay. It's always a good idea to express your wishes about what you want to happen with your estate before you die by means of a will. And a will is a formal document. It's not as if you can just say to somebody that this is what you want to happen. You really have to have it in writing, and it has to be signed in front of two witnesses, so there is a legal procedure in order to make the document a valid document. It's a good idea to have a will because, as I say, your wishes are not necessarily going to be followed unless you have them in writing, officially signed. You can appoint people to administer your estate, so they're the people that you trust to actually manage your affairs when you've gone, and you can also decide who you want to receive your assets, or maybe you're just leaving debts to somebody. But it's only by means of this document that it can be done officially and legally.
And if you don't make one, what happens?
Well, if you don't make one, then the law will step in and the intestacy rules will take over. The intestacy rules will decide, so it's the law itself will decide who is going to be responsible for administering your estate and who is going to get your property. So nothing to do with what you would want to happen. It's completely the law that decides.
So you may end up not in any way getting the result that you would have actually wished for yourself.
That could be the position, yes. And many people don't understand what the intestacy rules would end up doing with their property. They simply assume that it will go to their nearest and dearest, their next of kin, their family. But that's not necessarily the case. It can be very complicated and not necessarily anything to do with what you would expect your property to pass, how it would pass.
So if you want to make a will, I know that there are these standard form things that people buy, but would you advise going to a solicitor or how is it best done?
I would always suggest that you take professional advice when it comes to making a will. Yes, it's perfectly possible that you can download something off the internet, or you can buy something from the post office, or you can just write something on the back of an envelope. But there are so many things that can go wrong with that arrangement, and you wouldn't be aware of it, because a will is only effective when you actually pass, when you die. So you may think that you have your affairs in order, but in fact you've made some sort of a mistake, you haven't understood the law, it's perhaps not been witnessed correctly, or what you thought would happen because you wrote it out in your own words isn't exactly how it is going to happen when you're no longer around. So yes, I would always suggest approaching somebody professional, a solicitor.
Okay. Do you have any idea why people don't? It's almost like they're superstitious about it.
Yes, I think people are very reluctant to plan for a time when they have passed, when they've died, and they think that by making a will that will automatically mean the Grim Reaper will come knocking on the door almost immediately after they've signed the document, before the ink's dry. And obviously that's far from the truth. It's far better to create a will when you are fit and well and planning a happy, healthy future, rather than waiting until a time when perhaps we haven't talked about mental capacity, but if your faculties are failing, if your understanding is not as sharp as it was, then that might be something that would prevent you making a will if you don't have the appropriate, what we call mental capacity, to understand the nature of the document.
I know it's not your area, but any idea of what it might cost people averagely to do a very simple will, leaving everything to their spouse, the children?
I think it's I'm not 100% sure, but I would imagine if it's fairly straightforward, it could be as little as £75 to £100. What I would suggest is that you ring and ask the solicitor what the charges would be. They'll tell you up front before you sort of walk through the door, so you've got an idea of what you're letting yourself in for.
Okay, thank you very much for that. You mentioned just a minute ago mental capacity. And that leads us on, I think, to powers of attorney. Could you tell us what is a power of attorney? Yeah.
Yes, of course. We talked about wills before. Now, wills, as I said, are only effective when somebody actually dies. But what will happen if a person loses their mental faculties, their mental capacity, their ability to manage their affairs when they are still alive? So we've got that well, not a limbo period, but a time where they're not able to deal with their finances as they always did in the past, but the will isn't effective. The executors of the will are not able to look after the affairs. So there needs to be some legal mechanism to manage assets and liabilities, pay the bills, while somebody is still alive but lacks mental capacity.
Okay, well, we're going to kind of carry on with that in the second part of our conversation. But we've reached that point where I ask you to choose a piece of music. So what have you chosen for us and why?
Well, I'm choosing this piece of music more for my father, really, than myself. This is his favourite tune. It's Blue Moon. And it can be played, there are many people who play it, but he's always loved it. He's not musical himself, but he appreciates music, and that's his favourite.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll be back in a minute. Thank you very much for that. What a lovely piece of music. And now we're back again, and we're going to talk a little bit more about lasting power of attorney, and we'll have a little look at probate. The mechanism of lasting power of attorney, please.
Yes. Again, it's a process, it's a form, because you are delegating your decision-making ability to somebody that you trust. And I can't stress enough that it needs to be somebody that you trust who is appointed to be your attorney. Again, you can't do it on the back of an envelope. It has to be done on the appropriate form. And the way to do it, the easiest way to do it, is online. You can go to the government website, and the Office of the Public Guardian have a section on the government website which will enable you to create a document totally online. You just put in the details of yourself and the person that you want to appoint. It can be one person or more than one. You can appoint a replacement attorney. There are various questions that you can answer, and the form will be created at the press of a button. You print it off, and then you make arrangements to sign it. Your attorney signs it. You need another person to sign, a person called a certificate provider, and that person is simply verifying that you understand what you are doing, that you have the appropriate mental capacity to create the document. Everything has to be witnessed by people who are not related to you, and the certificate provider must not be related to you and can't be your attorney. And once you have created the document, signed the document, you have to pay a fee in order to register the document, because it's not created on signature. Unlike a will that is created once it's signed and witnessed, a power of attorney is only created when the Office of the Public Guardian register it. There is a fee. It used to be a very expensive procedure, but now it's £82. So it's much more reasonable. And there are fee remissions. If you are on a low income, you can have a free power of attorney or a half price power of attorney. You would have to produce documentation to prove your income.
So what powers are you giving to people? Is it your money? Is it your health? Is it what kind of powers are you handing over to somebody?
That's your choice. There are two different documents to delegate your decision making. The first one is a financial affairs or property and finances power of attorney, so that's all your money. The other document, lasting power of attorney, is a health and welfare. So that's to do with decisions about medical treatment, where you live, so to do with yourself as opposed to your finances. So you would make two separate documents. I'm afraid each does cost the £82, but you don't have to make both. You could just deal with your health, or you could deal with your finances. And
you said, OK, you can do it online, but at some stage then you're going to need to go to people who, as you said, give advice, or do you involve solicitors? Or
you can involve a solicitor if you want more understanding about what you're doing. Then solicitors will draw up these documents for you, because you might want to decide, make decisions about perhaps the document not becoming effective until a point in the future when you lose mental capacity. So you can have different conditions or restrictions put into the document. That makes it a little more complicated, and legal advice is a useful thing to take in those circumstances.
Okay, great. And it's becoming increasingly popular, increasingly used, is it?
Oh yes, they are a very useful vehicle for ensuring that your affairs are managed by somebody that you trust in the future.
Just some of the downsides of things that happen, what happens where somebody has lost their capacity, but they were the only people who had access to the assets and things of that kind, are you?
That can be problematic.
Yeah.
There are procedures in place. Again, it's the Office of the Public Guardian who would be involved, and a deputy would be appointed by the Office of the Public Guardian through the Court of Protection. So there are agencies that will step in. They will find somebody who will be your deputy. It's often a member of the family, but it could be somebody from the local authority or from the social services. But it's removing your choice as to who you wish to delegate to. So there are options.
Right.
They are more expensive options and more problematic, I would say.
Okay, so a very useful thing to have, and a very useful thing to sort out now when everybody is in good health.
In advance, yes.
One other just small government service that we have spoken of is Tell It Once. Is it Tell It?
Yes, we were talking about what would happen when you actually die and your family are dealing with your estate, whether you've got a will or you haven't got a will, and it's the intestacy rules, but your death has to be registered with various government agencies. So there is something called the Tell It Once, which is a government service which would enable your family to register your death, and that would mean that information was passed to the DVLA, it was passed to the Passport Office, passed to the local authority, passed to the benefits, the Department of Work and Pensions, and the taxman, HMRC. So that's quite a useful...
But the other main thing that after death comes, usually for the family and the executors, is probate. Just a very quick, we could have a few... Yes,
of course. A grant of probate is what is required if somebody dies and they have a will. If somebody dies and they don't have a will, it's a grant of letters of administration. It's the same function. That document enables your family, your executors, your administrators to deal with your estate when you've gone. Again, it's a formal process. The probate court will issue a grant of probate or a grant of letters, and now it can all be done online. So again, you can put in the details of the person who's died, the official form will be printed out, and you pay the appropriate fee. I think it's in the region of £215, something like that. But again, it's always advisable to seek professional advice in order to point you in the direction of gaining a grant of probate.
Is it the case, or as I've heard, that in fact a lot of the probate work that the solicitor then has to do is drudgery work of writing to lots and lots of people to say how much is in this account, how much was in that, and that a lot of that work could actually be done by somebody if they felt so doing prior to death?
Yes, of course. If it's always a good idea to have your affairs in order. So you've got details of all those bank accounts, all those premium bonds, all those insurance policies, because you're the person who knows best about your financial assets and liabilities. So if you can keep good records and pass those over to your executors, your family, before you go, then that makes life so much simpler in the long run.
Thank you very much. We could have talked, as you can imagine, for very, very much time longer, but that is excellent. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.